Hello, and welcome to Rory's Brainworks, where we get creative and see if it works. Today, we'll be going over how to make a flavorful character backstory. Is this the best way? Maybe. Is it my way? Absolutely yes. And I have made a wealth of backstories that have enthralled the gaming table as well as disgusted the gaming table. Created lots of laughs and created a lot of serious moments. Not only do you learn about yourself, but your friends around you. Can I guarantee I can provide that for you? No, that all depends on your delicious little mind. But I can tell you how to get there. Because creating a backstory for a character that you play as in Dungeons & Dragons is almost more important than your stats. And I know that sounds weird coming from a game built on numbers, but it's true. It's also a game built on story. And what is going to cause more of an interesting, fun, or memorable moment with your friends? How big you got a number to go, or what happened in the story? What Marie said. Kind of what he said. But before we get into the delicious nuggets of creating a backstory for your character, I must first thank one of my sponsors, the lovely people at the Tabletop Game Shop. They create some amazing metal and plastic dice that I am now just using all the time. Not because they support me, but because I support them. They do good work. Head on over to thetabletopgameshop.com, put in Rory10 for a little bit of a discount. You're welcome, Dice Goblins. Now let's deep dive into creating backstories. So what's the first thing you should be looking for when trying to nurture an idea? That beginning sense of a character. A lot of it usually stems from your class. Whatever class you end up picking, whether you're a cleric or a ranger, rogue, paladin, what have you, warlock, wizard, sorcerer, maybe get some of those magic users in there too. Fighter doesn't get enough representation. They have the easiest backstories to write because they can be anything. Generally, a class will give someone that basic framework to creating a character. The problem with that is that you've already invited walls into how you're thinking about your character. If you want to be creative, don't invite walls into wide open spaces. Structure can be good, yes, absolutely, but it isn't everything. That's one of those things that D&D kind of beats out of you. That structure isn't always necessary and not always the right way to go. It opens you up to the possibilities of what can happen as soon as you start bringing down some of those walls. So yes, say you want to start creating a backstory based off of the framework of the class that you have. Take a cleric, a holy man. Were you always a holy man? Did you start out that way? Was your family following a patron for the longest time, following a god for the longest time, and you just found yourself inside your father's or mother's shoes? Or maybe you weren't always a cleric. Maybe you're a born-again cleric. Come into being a cleric after a life of being a rogue, which is why you end up talking well with the domain of trickery. You were a rogue. You did some nefarious things, but in the end, you surpassed that, came over it, and forgot everything you knew about being a rogue, purposely, to become this new person, reborn as a cleric. Your hand may still itch to find a dagger every once in a while, but that mace, that hammer that's in your hand now, reminds you that you are a different person. Your trials and tribulations created who you are now, which is why your cleric has such a high insight. They're streetwise. You see? Already creating a compelling backstory by taking a step away from that structure. When you think of a cleric, you think of someone who was born into it or just became associated with it because you're a fish in a pond with other fish that have been clerics before. You gotta think outside that, and that is the point. Find an idea and then think, how can I take that idea and make it incredibly different? When people think of that structured process, creating a story or creating a backstory, they think of something very linear. You have the idea, and then it rivers down towards these other ideas. That isn't always the case. That's not how I operate. If I give you insight into how I operate, perhaps you'll find out that's how it works for you. So how do I operate? Well, I have the idea. And instead of cascading this snowballing of ideas, I have an orbiting system where I have the idea and then start creating quirky parts of that idea that end up showing up, orbiting around that. What's some smaller parts of that idea? Does that have its own little small orbiting idea of itself? And then you begin connecting those until it's a system, not just a river, it's a waterworks. That's what you want to create. This entire spiraling, labyrinthian aqueduct system, a cistern, if you will. Take that idea and then think upon it further. Sometimes the opposite of what it can be, and you can shave off elements from that. Yes, you are a cleric, but you used to be a rogue. Shave off elements from that, have that be a part of the orbiting system. That's the fun of creation. We're creating things from nothing. The opposite of physics and the natural world that we know. Imagination breaks these rules. So important to remember that. We know a world of structure all around us. Break that structure. That's how I do my world building. That's how I do my backstories. That's why my book is so weird sometimes to me. It's just like, man, this is just outside the norm. But that's important. That's what you want to do. Create a system. Orbit. Smaller satellites based off of those orbiting ones. If you find out you can't do that, go with the river. Cascade. Snowball with that. So, when you look at a character's backstory, we're looking at things that have happened in the past. Obviously, backstory. You are creating the front of the story as goes. So, you obviously have to think about things like upbringing. What kind of upbringing did your character have? Talk about your parents. Talk about siblings. What was your relationships with them? That makes it more compelling. Do you want to have a really good upbringing? A wonderful family? Supportive siblings? And just one day your character cracked under pressure they weren't aware even existed? And somehow they found themselves in the underbelly of a city because they wanted some kind of thrill? They had lived that crazy D&D suburban life that was just so boring, and then all of a sudden they cracked. It is easy to go with the I was raised from nothingness and became the great man that I am. I never knew my father, never knew my mother. My siblings are out there trying to murder me. I mean, that's fun as is anyway, but everyone likes the orphan story. But it also feels like forced tragedy to me. Brings up another part, other than upbringing. Upbringing does, in a way, dictate the speed of that backstory, the pacing. Was it tragic? Was it happy? Was it a lonely existence? Was it full of love and support? Where did it change? The tribulations, that's the real meat of the backstory. Having things like parents or siblings or fond friends gives the DM a little bit something to work with, gives your character risk. So the DM would take that and would have some kind of kidnapping letter saying that one of your siblings has been kidnapped while visiting a small town that your party is nearby. Your party has to focus in on something, but you gave your DM ammunition to have your character be like, we have to divert from our main mission right now to go over here. It means something to my character. Leaving a lot of open-ended hooks for the DM to grab and bring into the story is always important and always fun. Are they going to take all of them? No. But if you give plenty of hooks for them to grab onto, it can drastically change your character within the story and their relations with the other players. I'm going to give examples later on about some of my own personal experiences. Trials and tribulations. What happened to your character that has caused them to go out to adventure? What is the nature of this tribulation? Something boring, something tragic, in search of something. My go-to is weird. Weird is my number one backstory trials and tribulation to go with. Creating some weird scenario, because it is a realm of fantasy. Creating a weird scenario that you would not see in your normal day-to-day life is what makes it fun. Give that character ability to adventure because something odd happened and they need to rectify or avenge or just come to terms with at some point. Weird makes magic. I hope that is the one thing that you take away from this. Weird makes magic. Upbringing, relationships, trials and tribulations. These are the backstory elements. Feed them, make it dynamic. Create hooks that the DM has as open-ended tools, and then add some weird to it. Add some weird. How weird do you say? Let me give you some examples. Right. Okay, so I'm bringing up two characters, one of which was raised in a family of clerics and fighters. So the character themselves was half fighter, half cleric, multi-classed. They used to have a class that was actually both of them called a war priest. That changed, but still, I love that class a lot. A lot of martial prowess and a lot of healing abilities if need be. You were your own pocket healer. Now in this character's backstory, everything was really fine with their family. Very pious, had a few siblings, great relationship with mother and father. He had gone out on a pilgrimage to prove himself to his village, which was a right to ascend into adulthood, to fight a large beast, bring back the head, to prove that you had done so. So my character had gone out into the wilds to find a beast to fell. And it was only a day later when he found a wyvern that was nearly dead. So basically imagine a smaller dragon that was almost dead to begin with. So he thinks to himself, this'll prove myself very manly. And so he destroys the wyvern easily. He was already injured, he was already dying. He basically did a mercy killing. And immediately afterwards, upon cutting off the head, a woman with arms filled with buckets of water just comes up to him and says, "Did you just kill my daughter?" And my character's just like, "Oops, I don't know what you mean." This woman then turns into this large, horrific beast. What my character didn't know is that I just killed the daughter of an evil god. A god of aberrations and horrific beasts. And so, utilizing the best self-defense he can, fights off this woman as she is trying to destroy him for killing his daughter, whom was wounded in battle. And as he is fending off this tentacled, horrific god, the god says, "Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, you're quite strong, and you could be good breeding stock." So she holds down my character, and with her acidic tongue, draws her symbol into my head. Now, as a good boy raised into a very happy, pious family, having the sigil of an evil god stained on his forehead, sizzled in there, scarred in permanence, was kind of a bad omen. And she said to him, "You are now engaged to one of my other daughters. She is known as the Violet Call, and she will come to you when it is time to wed." I left that very open-ended for the DM. My character's mission after that trials and tribulation, bringing the wyvern head to the family and saying, "I'm going to go out," wearing a headband, of course. My character, after that engagement, took the wyvern head back to his village, and wearing a headband, said that he was going to go off into the world and fight more beasts. What he didn't tell his family is that he was training, so when the time came, he could kill his fiancée, knowing it was going to be a horrific beast. I left the hooks open-ended. My character always wore a headband, was always keen to fighting large creatures and beasts. Yes, eventually the headband came off throughout the campaign. People found out that I had an evil god sigil on my head. It did cause some problems internally, but we got over that. Until, well, maybe 7 to 8 months within the campaign, and my fiancée showed up. Giant purple worm. I had named her the Violet Call, and purple worm was what the DM came up with. So the purple worm came out of the ground in front of our adventurers after the ground had been quaking for a little bit, and was calling out, screeching down to us below, and the DM called her the Violet Call. And I looked to the rest of the players and I said, "Guys, let me introduce you to my fiance," which caused a bit of an uproar, but it was a great way to end the session for that night. And that brings us to the less tame character number 2. Now, this one I have a very large personal liking to. Other people did not have a liking to it because they thought they were gross. Now, it does get a bit explicit. There might be a few trigger warnings as it does deal with sex workers, because this character was sold into sex slavery when he was but a child. And that was the only life that he knew. So he was a warlock. Technically, he was a witch because we were playing Pathfinder for this campaign. And witches in Pathfinder have the ability to unlock particular abilities. One of these abilities was prehensile hair. And it said that a witch could grow out their hair 3 feet in length, and it had its strength modifier equal to the intelligence modifier, which means that hair could beat the crap out of people utilizing the intelligence modifier, which is what you use for your spells as a witch. And I was like, awesome. And it also said that male witches could use their beard to do that. So I could grow out my beard 3 feet, I could drop a knife into my beard would grab it and stab people. And I was like, yes please. That is the best possible outcome for this character. Why not? This character was sold into sex slavery when he was very young. That was the only life he knew for the longest time, until one day in the throes of chronic depression and after a late night with an older client, he fell asleep wishing for change, wishing to be out of that life. And that is when the grand matron of the succubi came to him in his dreams and said, "I will give you power if you destroy broth," because brothels were eliminating natural lust in the world. So her children, succubi, could not feed on the unhealthy sexual dreams and desires of folk out in the wilds. They could release those desires with pleasurable company they paid for. So the succubus said, I will give you powers if you destroy the brothels. Leave the sex workers alone, but destroy the brothels themselves. And I was like, you got it. And so my warlock was born. He was a professional courtesan, so he had points in being able to actually seduce people very well. But he had become celibate. After a life of selling his body, he no longer desired that sort of thing, which kind of created an instability with him. Kind of like Black Snake Moan, if you remember that movie with Christina Ricci. She had just overwhelming urge to be like, I gotta have sex with something. And that was kind of something that happened to my character. Anytime something suggestive happened within the campaign, he had this jug that I talked to the DM about that was weightless. So it almost kind of floated at his hip. And it was an opaque glass, so you couldn't see what was on the inside. And whenever something suggestive, sexually suggestive happened, he would take the jug, unstopper the cork, smell it, and then feel better, like smelling salts. That was a thing that happened a lot throughout the campaign, and no one ever knew what was inside that little jug, even until the campaign was done and they had to ask because I was very protective of it. Another thing about this witch character is that he was like the plagues. He had a great spell called Vomit Spiders. So he would throw up spiders, and then he had a cloak of wasps, and he could rain down frogs. One particular horrific event that he did was that he grew out his beard into the mouth of an unconscious character, not a player character, an NPC, and then vomited spiders. The spiders crawled across his beard and into the mouth of this unfortunate soul and had their insides eaten out. Had their insides eaten, killing them slowly. What was in the jug, you might ask? So did the other players. Keep it weird, keep them guessing, add some hooks. And if you're good enough in the comments, I might tell you what was in that jug. Let me tell you, it's nothing good. Because weird makes magic. I reiterate once more, weird makes magic. Give your DM plenty of hooks, plenty of open-ended things they can implement and make it weird. Well, hey, I hope you had a wonderful time learning how I create character backstories. Weird makes magic. Kind of like that weird, yes. Shush. I am also positively exalted to hear about some of the backstories you guys end up creating. Tell me about them on any of my platforms. You can follow them in the description down below. Speaking of which, I would be remiss if I did not bring up my other sponsors today, the lovely people at Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rory's Brainworks, just like this YouTube channel. They are my D&D vanguard, my little dice goblins, and without them, these dungeon adventures would be way harder to accomplish. Thank you for spending your time with me. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to this madness, and comment down below what kind of D&D things you would like me to teach you. As always, I'm Rory. This is my brain. I'm fairly certain it works. Be safe and go create some art.